Well, time now for our Daily Rant with MSNBC contributor and Washington Post editorial writer Jonathan Capehart, a topic close to my heart, the issue of anger at the system and how to turn it into positive action. And before that, Jonathan begins a programming note. After the rant, we'll tell you about all of our next steps in our campaign to get money out. But before we do that, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dylan. The other day, I was asked if there are any parallels between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party movement. The short answer is yes. But if it doesn't do four things: broaden its base of support to include those who share its values or goals; 2, get specific about what the goals are; 3, bring the protests to Washington; and 4, get support from members of Congress, it could squander its momentum. Here's where the two movements are alike. Both Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party are organic movements. They rose up from everyday people who got tired of being pushed around or ignored by powers they believe are beyond their control. Both movements eschew having one or a crew of recognized leaders who speak for everyone. So far, it's worked for the Tea Party. For the nascent movement centered in Lower Manhattan, there's still time for it to get its act together. Occupy Wall Street is already doing the first and second things I proposed. The massive demonstration this afternoon will feature unions marching with it in solidarity. And its declaration of the occupation of New York City details its beliefs and grievances. But they're still having trouble articulating specifically what they're fighting for beyond, for instance, decrying that corporations, quote, have consistently outsourced labor and use that outsourcing as leverage to cut workers' health care and pay. There's no clear articulation of a path for changing the policies that have engendered so much justified rage. So Occupy Wall Street has to get specific, and then it has to bring the anger that's been on display in Lower Manhattan since September 17th to the people in the building behind me here in Washington. If the progressive, younger, more diverse protesters want to do more than get mad about the power of the 1% over the 99%, they ought to emulate some of the tactics of the conservative, older, whiter Tea Partiers. Sure, it's probably a bit crazy to think that Tea Partiers and the Occupy Wall Streeters might join forces. But as Mark, a Tea Partier from Ohio, wrote to me today, quote, both see corruption in high places, corporations and government. And those two areas are so closely aligned that there isn't really much of a difference between criticizing the tyranny of corrupt government and the tyranny of corrupt corporations. Dylan, all right, they ought to think about it.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about indeed. Thank you, Jonathan. As I said at the top of the show, more than 100,000 of us have signed on to the Get Money Out campaign, having nothing to do with any of these protests. It is a campaign that we started last week. That's the sound of the swells rising. Can you hear that, Jonathan? If the past week is any indication, the waves have only just begun from our movement, and this is how we got to where we are in just 1 week.
Tuesday was the big unveil. We launched the proposed amendment with Jimmy Williams, along with no labels, Mark McKinnon.
All money is speech under the Supreme Court of the United States interpretation of the Constitution. So you either ban it or you don't. It's just that simple.
You're going to see an eruption, a volcanic wave of support headed your way.
And we did. Within minutes, nearly 6,000 signed up after hearing Jimmy and Mark. Within the first 9 hours, 27,000 signatures. It exploded on the digital universe on Huffington Post and DR.com, along with a wave of tweets, Facebook postings, and emails. We followed up on Wednesday with just one of the endless examples of how money in politics is keeping Washington from addressing our nation's biggest problems.
Nowhere is that barrier of money more apparent than in the American housing crisis.
It kept getting bigger, with 35,000 joining the fight. That tidal wave grew with guest posts on DR.com from the National People's Action and the Public Campaign, Jimmy Williams, Joe Costello. The growth continued. Thursday brought Mark Ames and his Nation co-writer, Yasha Levine, to the show with evidence that it's not only politicians for sale, but ideas.
This is worse than hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is a kind of moral thing. This is actually a scam played out on the American people.
We now stood with 59,000 Get Money Out patriots in the fight. Right after the show, we launched our first Thursday night fight, when hundreds of you weighed in on Twitter with ideas, concerns, and suggestions to improve the amendment. Friday, as Wall Street protests spontaneously exploded in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, Senator Bernie Sanders joined us. He's been mad as hell for as long as I've known him.
Obviously, you need real campaign finance reform. In my view, that means public funding of elections.
A weekend, we stood at 70,000 strong. I spent the weekend with the folks mad as hell at the Occupy Wall Street protests. By Sunday night, 80,000 of you signed on. Monday brought early Get Money Out supporter Congresswoman Donna Edwards to the show.
It's imperative for us to get money out of politics, to clean up our elections, for us to own our elections once again.
As you pledge your support, the focus moved to building a digital wave, as we explained on DR.com. Monday night, 87,000 joined the fight. Back at Occupy Wall Street, Deepak Chopra led a 2-minute meditation with demonstrators to harness their anger for positive change. Tuesday showed just how important it is for this to transcend the political spectrum with progressive Roger Hickey and Tea Party co-founder Carl Denninger.
We've got to say to the politicians, say no to big money. We will elect you.
This has to stop. We have built a 30-year pyramid scheme, and it's collapsing around us.
After the show, our numbers swelled to 92,000, and then a wave of support sparked our first high surf alert. Just 1 week in, our first threshold, 100,000 co-founders joining to begin the crusade to get money out.
And remember, this is only the beginning of what we need to do this. Do stay with us, ride the wave, build the wave, tell your friends about Get Money Out, and help us draft this constitutional amendment through the fall. Raise your voice, and the issue of money in politics will be front and center by the time we get to the conventions in 2012. That's going to do it for us, and Hardball begins right now.